In the news tonight, His Majesty the Supreme Commander leads a ceremony at the Unknown Soldier Monument as the country marks the Karama Battle anniversary. The UN envoy for Syria warns that without dialogue beginning on a political transition, it will be difficult to sustain the truce. And the US President begins talks with the Cuban leaders at the start of a historic trip to Havana. Good evening and welcome to the News at 10. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, led a ceremony at the Jordan Valley Unknown Soldier Monument as the kingdom marks the 48th anniversary of the Karama Battle. On the national occasion, King Abdullah received cables of congratulation from senior civic and military officials. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein also received similar cables from the top officials. In their cables, the officials praised the victory and sacrifices of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army led by the late King Hussein bin Talal at the 1968 Al-Karama battle, calling it a turning point in the country's history. Jordanians recall Karama battle with pride in the sacrifices of their army and honor the fallen soldiers. Here's more.
Jordanians celebrate with national pride the sacrifices and victory of their armed forces in a battle that was a turning point in the Arab-Israeli conflict. The country's soldiers who fell in the line of duty, repelling an advance by Israeli tanks across the Jordan Valley 48 years ago, are being honored. At the Jordan Valley site of the Unknown Soldier Monument, His Majesty King Abdullah, the Supreme Commander of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army, led top civic and military officials at a ceremony to honor the fallen soldiers. Several royal family members, Prime Minister Abdullah and other senior officials and serving and retired officers joined the celebration. The king reviewed a guard of honor, laid wreaths at the monument, and recited verses from the Quran at the site. In a post on the Royal Court's Facebook page, His Majesty wrote, "Standing at the site of Al-Karama, where the battles of the Arab army and its sacrifices and the names of the martyrs and their heroic deeds will always remain medals of pride and honor that every Jordanian citizen holds dear. Our soldiers will always shield and protect our country in the face of all enemies." On March 21, 1968, Jordanian soldiers repelled an Israeli attack on the small town of Al-Karama, or Dignity, in the Jordan Valley. Several Jordanian soldiers fell in the battle, and the raid was repelled with heavy losses for Israel as the military launched an artillery barrage against Israeli tanks. A total of 250 Israeli soldiers were killed and 450 were wounded. الجلال والجمال والسناء والبهاء في رباك. Military top brass and officers visited the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army Cemetery in Zarqa, laid wreaths on the tombs of the martyrs, and recited verses of the Quran. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The UN Syria Special Envoy said he is concerned by the slow progress of talks. Staffan de Mistura warned that without dialogue beginning on a political transition, it would be difficult to sustain the cessation of hostilities and aid deliveries. Speaking after talks with the head of the Syrian government delegation, Bashar Jafari, de Mistura said Jafari had told him it was too early to discuss political transition. Syrian government and opposition negotiators were meeting in Geneva as the UN-led peace talks continue with the second round of negotiations. The opposition coordinator, Riyad Hijab, led the higher negotiations committee in the last leg of the talks due to end on Thursday. De Mistura described Syria's political transition as the mother of all issues. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry proposed to hold an urgent meeting with US representatives to agree on the mechanism of controlling the ceasefire in Syria. It warned that Moscow will act unilaterally starting from tomorrow if it gets no response. The United States rejected Russia's call, saying that its concerns were already being handled in a constructive manner. Meanwhile, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad told injured soldiers in a ceremony that the only thing that equates to the sacrifices of Syrian soldiers is the safety of the country. The United States and its allies targeted Daesh militants in Iraq with 16 airstrikes. The US military said 3 of Saturday's strikes were near Heat, which has been heavily targeted in recent days, hitting 2 separate Daesh tactical units and 4 tactical vehicles. Additional strikes in Kisik and Mosul destroyed tactical units and supply cache of the militant group. No strikes were reported in Syria. A video posted by Daesh showed explosions resulting from airstrikes and their aftermath on the streets of what is said to be Mosul. The footage posted online showed buildings damaged and ablaze following the reported strike. US Vice President Joe Biden said the United States is watching Iran like a hawk. He vowed Tehran will never be allowed to resume a nuclear weapon program under the Iran nuclear deal. Biden told the pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC in Washington that the incentives are allied for Iran to uphold its part of the deal. In the speech, the American vice president also criticized Israel's settlement and expansionist policy in the occupied West Bank. Israel says it intends to keep large settlement blocks in any future peace agreement with the Palestinians. Palestinians say they fear Israel's settlement expansion will deny them a viable country. Biden said the region is moving toward a one-state solution in regard to Israel, which is termed dangerous.
Under this agreement, there is no political will among Israelis or Palestinians to move forward at this moment with serious negotiations. And that's incredibly disappointing, because the only way, in my view, to guarantee Israel's future and security, its identity as a Jewish and democratic state, is with a two-state solution.
Cuban President Raul Castro welcomed US President Barack Obama in Havana at the start of the historic talks. Obama was expected to press his Cuban counterpart for economic and democratic reforms while hearing complaints about US sanctions. The American president arrived in Cuba yesterday on a trip that comes 15 months after he and Castro agreed to end 5 decades of Cold War-era animosity and work to normalize relations. The historic visit of only 145 kilometers from U.S. shores is the first by U.S. president in 88 years. Here's more.
A historic day in Cuba Sunday as President Obama became the first sitting U.S. president to visit the island since Calvin Coolidge in 1928. The president was cheered by crowds in Havana.
Muy emocionante, muy emocionante.
This woman said it was very emotional to see him and said she hoped the visit will be for good. Despite the rainy weather, President Obama, along with his wife and daughters, pressed ahead with a visit to a colonial neighborhood. They were also given a tour of Havana's 18th century cathedral by Cardinal Jaime Ortega, who played a role in secret talks that cleared the way for the visit. The 3-day trip is the culmination of a diplomatic opening announced by Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro in December 2014, ending an estrangement that began in 1959. On Monday, the president gets down to business, meeting with Castro at the Palace of the Revolution. He also plans to visit a state-owned microbrewery and attend a state dinner.
Migrants stranded at Greece's border camp of Idomeni for a week staged a protest demanding to be allowed through into Macedonia. Riot police watched as men, women and children rallied on the closed border with Macedonia, clapped and chanted Germany and opened the border. Some 12,000 people, with an estimated 40% being children, have been staying put at the closed border despite the Balkan migration corridor being shut. Greece, meanwhile, appealed to its European Union partners for logistical help to implement a deal with Turkey aimed at stemming the flow of migrants into Europe. Many of the refugees are unaware of the tough new rules and continue to come ashore on the Greek islands. Turkish officials arrived on the Greek islands of Lesbos to help implement the deal, which requires new arrivals to be held until their asylum applications are proceeded. For those deemed ineligible, they will be sent back to Turkey from April 4th onwards. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras said during talks with the EU's Migration Commissioner that assistance must come quickly and Greece will move quickly, even adapting its legislation if needed so that there is the best possible cooperation. U.S. Special Representatives for North Korea Policy Sung Kim said North Korea should stop all provocative actions, including missile tests. He was responding to North Korea's firing of 5 short-range missiles into the sea of its east coast. South Korea said the identified projectiles flew about 200 kilometers and landed in waters east of North Korea. Kim held talks with South Korea officials in Seoul to discuss sanctions on Pyongyang. It's Mother's Day. Her Majesty Queen Rania Abdullah visited children currently residing at Dar al-Aman, the Jordan River Foundation Child Safety Center. The Queen met with a number of the center's caregivers and in-house teachers. She was accompanied by Director of the Jordan River Foundation In'am al-Barishi and Child Safety Program Manager at the Queen Rania Family and Child Center Muntaha Harasis. The Queen thanked the teachers and caregivers for their dedication to helping vulnerable children and easing their suffering. She also met with 2 girls at the center who have both excelled in school despite their abusive backgrounds that have forced them to seek protection at Dar al-Aman. Queen Rania visited the center's residence units, where each caregiver looks after up to 8 children in one unit. Her Majesty also spent time with children while they were hand-making Mother's Day gifts, including paintings, crafts and greeting cards. The children gifted Her Majesty's handmade broidered necklace as well as Mother's Day greeting cards from each child. New York's Times Square was the stage for a giant puppet show when puppets and their masters gathered to celebrate World Puppet Day. The event was hosted by Avenue Q, a Broadway musical starring both people and puppets. World Puppetry Day was first created by Iranian puppet artist Javad Zolfarghari in 2003. It was commissioned by the International Puppetry Association and is marked around the world on March 21st.
Sorry, bro. Yeah, it's been a while. Wait, what was last night? Yes. Oh, yeah. It was good. Oh, well,
Qatar may house thousands of football fans in Bedouin-style tents in desert areas close to stadiums during the 2022 World Cup. Around 500,000 fans are expected to turn up for the tournament that will take place in November and December 2022. Organizers are holding up the tent idea as a creative and culturally authentic way for Qatar to meet FIFA requirements. FIFA's requirement was for 60,000 rooms to be available. World number one Novak Djokovic produced sublime form to clinch an unprecedented fifth men's title at Indian Wells with a 6-2, 6-love demolition of big serving Canadian Milos Raonic in the men's final. Djokovic, who beat long-term rival Rafael Nadal in the semi-finals, also maintained his perfect record against Raonic as he won their sixth career meeting. The 28-year-old Serb broke his opponent twice in the first set and 3 times in the second to wrap up victory in 1 hour and 17 minutes. And finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. Chilly in Amman and much of the hilly areas with low clouds for the rest of tonight and early morning hours. But the cold and humid air mass will taper off. However, milder conditions are in the forecast for the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea with light winds. Temperature will rise slightly tomorrow, but it will still be cold in many regions and warmer in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea, where daytime temperatures will be in the mid-20s. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warm day tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and a bit choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close here our top stories once again, His Majesty the Supreme Commander leads a ceremony at the Unknown Soldier Monument as the country marks the Karama Battle's anniversary. The UN envoy for Syria warns that without dialogue beginning on a political transition, it will be difficult to sustain the truce. And the US President begins talks with Cuban leaders at the start of a historic trip to Havana. And finally, I hope you all had a wonderful Mother's Day. I'm Lord Balkar, thank you for watching and good night.